Good morning to the people, our guests who have joined us since our meeting early this morning. As we talked about it, the originator and the users of Bitcoin, this new kind of currency, have not really addressed the legal status in currency and in taxation. And so the question is, what is Bitcoin for legal purposes? This is a critical question because Bitcoin's legal characterization makes a difference as to whether it is regulated, how it is regulated, and who regulates it. So our guest today, Martin Mushkin, a noted counsel on business litigation and corporate transactions, will discuss this new currency. Mr. Mushkin runs the firm mushkinlaw.com with offices in New York, Stanford, and Petaluma, California. His corporate law practice covers a wide variety of domestic and international organizational, financial, labor-related, property right, and litigation issues. He received his BBA from the University of Wisconsin and his JD degree from Harvard Law School. And by the way, I think there was somebody that told me that they were preceded Mr. Mushkin by 1 year. There you go. Say hello later at the Harvard Law School. He served as a judge advocate general officer in the U.S. Air Force. Before entering civilian practice, he was a senior trial attorney with the SEC. He has an A5 rating from Martindale-Hubbell, which is a rating agency of lawyers, and this is the highest rating you can get. He is also an expeditionary mountaineer and a member of the American Alpine Club and a member of the, by the way, Greenwich, Connecticut Town Democratic Committee. Mr. Mushkin.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be among age mates in the Bitcoin world. I went to a convention, the 2020 Money Convention, last October, and there was hardly a soul there who was over 35. Most of them were clearly in their late 20s, early 30s. One guy came up to me, he said, "I bet I'm older than you." I'm 83. Turned out that he was 2 months younger than me. At any rate, if we were at Starbucks, I'd take out my phone, I'd go like this to a scanner, and I'd pay my bill. There are people in our office who go out to dinner. They're all members of the same some kind of credit card arrangements. She tells me that they want to split the bill, 3 or 4 ladies. They hold up their phones to each other's phones. The one person gets all of the credits in her phone. She goes up to the cashier and pays the bill. That's the world we live in. When the people in this audience were growing up, it was dollar bills, not $5 bills, dollar bills. You went to the grocery store. Perhaps you could use a check. Credit cards were almost unknown. The computer was unheard of. Now we're in a completely different age. We all know that money started when people needed to store their value. Guy's growing tomatoes, got too many tomatoes. He wants to trade them with somebody else. Pretty soon he's got a hoard of whatever. He doesn't really want to do that. He wants to trade them someplace else. So they designate rocks, otherwise known as diamonds, perhaps, or gold, bricks, which they've smelted down, or copper in the first days. And they said, that's our stored value. Soon they needed a place to put their stored value because they couldn't leave the hut without somebody walking in and helping themselves to it, and they couldn't carry it around. Then came banks. The first banks were temples, and they charged a fee, otherwise known as a sacrifice. I don't mean to be sacrilegious, but that's the fact. Now we've come to the point where most business transactions, which means every transaction, is as I described, it's digital. Money around the world goes through SWIFT, which has a big computer center in New York. That's I don't remember the exact name, Society for the World International Transfer of Funds or something like this. By prohibiting Iran to use that system, it had a substantial effect in bringing them to the recent negotiations because they had to go back to a barter system, middle-aged barter type system. Okay, so what then, and how did I get into Bitcoin? Around the beginning of January, I got a call from a guy who turned out to be 22. I just bought control of a Bitcoin company. I don't want it to be public. What do I do? I said, come and see me, and we'll talk about it. He did. I said, where's the guy you bought this from? Well, I don't know. He's an email address. I said, how'd you pay him? Well, I paid him by sending him some Bitcoin. He gave me a key number to the account he wanted it to go. Of course, that number's only good for the one transaction if you're smart. And I transmitted the money. Well, where's it's stored? How do I know? How many stockholders do you have? About 140. Where are they? Their email addresses. I don't know where they are. How did this guy take the company public? By the way, the guy who was talking to me did nothing wrong. He bought control after all of this had happened. And he wanted to make sure that he wasn't going to do anything wrong. He said, I was told it was in Romania. I said, a stock exchange? He said, no, not a stock exchange, a Bitcoin exchange. Really? They don't do this anymore, though. Okay, you can see the jurisdictional issues here. Who has control over this? Who can bring what cause of action if they're not happy, et cetera, et cetera. Explained all of this to him, and I said, here's how you go private in a normal world for a small, tiny company. You have to get some documents, give them some disclosure, send them a letter, go through all of this normal kind of things like this. And you happen to be in New York. I don't remember where this company was incorporated. It actually was incorporated. Some of these things just say, we are incorporated, voila. And they think they are. That's pretty well stopped. I don't see that anymore. Oh, thank you. He left. I sent him a bill, as we had agreed. I did not get paid by a check sent by him. I got a check from Chase Bank because he'd used their system to have them issue the check from his bank account. That's the way the world is going round. Now, obviously, we're talking about storage of value and exchange of values. Tomatoes for something else, or an automobile for whatever currency you happen to be using, et cetera, et cetera. And one of the things that I see a lot is the transmission of value from one country to another, not just between people, but between countries. Okay. So we're past coins. We're into this computerized age. And a lot of what we also see, of course, particularly in Greenwich and Stanford, is people employed to utilize, trade, sometimes manipulate, etc., money. The famous bank robber is alleged to have said when asked, why do you rob banks? He said, that's where the money is. As soon as you say that, in the digital age, money is someplace in the clouds. Literally the clouds nowadays, except the clouds is a computer someplace, a server. We had a fellow email us, of course. I'd like to see you next week when I'm in New York. We have a system for tracing trucks. This is not a new idea. It's been around for 20 years. By putting a chip someplace in the engine compartment or whatever, it's not uncommon at all. Where are you? Sao Paulo. He came in to see us because he wanted to sell this product in the United States, or lease it, because that's what one does with this kind of software. Either a copyright or a patent, depending on what country you're in. And we asked him in the process, where are your servers that you have this on? Oh, in the United States. I said, not in Brazil? No, in the United States, because this is the safe harbor. We all know that we use ATMs. ATMs, if you follow that area, and I do to some degree, the industry is saying, oh my God, what's going to happen with ATMs? People are using less and less currency, and we now have, quote, omnichannel, back to the phone business again, where people can transmit money back and forth that way. You can deposit your checks with a phone, all these things. But what's happening in that world is that they are now developing ATMs for the transfer of currency into Bitcoin and vice versa. Odd that the ATM community is worried about what's going to happen with their normal ATMs that we use at a 7-Eleven or what have you. Because the Treasury is actually printing more bills at the present time than almost any time in its history. Where's all that money going? I really don't know. I didn't see that. But my bet is that a great deal of it is in $100 bills that's going into mattresses around the world because people don't trust the system in their particular country. And they do trust the reserve currency of the world, the United States, to become rather stable. Now, Bitcoin is a development of blockchain technology. I can't explain the details of it. I'm not an electrical engineer. The amount of time, effort, and money that is going into developments based on blockchain technology is at least hundreds of millions of dollars. It was developed by somebody who is, or some group known as Satoshi Nakamoto. The handout that you have is from a magazine called Why Bitcoin. Why Bitcoin is a magazine that is published specifically for conventions and handed out at those conventions. We happen to write the legal column for that magazine. For instance, the 2020 Money Convention this year in late October in Vegas at the Venetian, which is a huge place, I'm told. It'll be a seat drop. There'll be 4,500 copies put on every seat during the main events and things like that. Satoshi Nakamoto said in the lead to his article on Bitcoin, which was published in late 2008 or the beginning of 2009. It's in the article that you've picked up, I hope. What is needed is an electronic payment system based on cryptographic proof instead of trust, allowing any two willing parties to transact directly with each other without the need for a trusted third party. Transactions that are computationally impractical to reverse would protect sellers from fraud. Then there's some other material. The system is secure as long as honest nods collectively control more CPU power than any cooperating group of attacker nods. Now that's the key to what this whole area is about electronically. I might add that the innovation that comes to our attention just as lawyers, and I really mean that, because we're not the technical end at all, is we're going to do X, Y, and Z. It's astonishing. It's really astonishing, the innovation and the thought process and the money that's going into this. It's really becoming very big. And the oddity is that the world value of Bitcoin, which is now, I guess, somewhere around $244 a coin, is somewhere around $6 billion. That's a pittance in the world economy. But the trading in Bitcoin is tremendous. Tens of millions of dollars a week and probably per day. A lot of people simply arbitrage it. They buy from source A and they sell to source B. Standard kind of a money arbitrage or a commodities arbitrage. It's highly volatile at this point, which of course for the traders is a good thing, but for investors, it's not a good thing. So let's suppose that a guy, and we'll take New York, is sitting in his New York apartment, and he's trading, and he goes, and he says, gee, New York has a Bitcoin licensing rule now. I wonder if I have to apply. Well, I'm an investor. Is he an investor? So we pick up the phone, call the New York Superintendent of Finance office, and say, your regulation exempts investors from having to register as to get a bit license. Oh yes, I see that. I'll get back to you. Never got back to us. They won't answer that question because they don't quite want to, in my view, they don't want to define that term at the present time and have the fact that they've done so published. You call FinCEN. That's the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, which is part of the Treasury. Ask them whether this guy is a user or not and things like this. What's the volume? What's he doing? We don't care about that. They'll give it to you orally. They won't confirm it in writing, but that's at the level that I just spoke about. Write an email to the equivalent department of the state of Illinois. We live in a federal system, so you've got 51 regulators. They'll get back to you. We have no position on trading in Bitcoin at the present time. Thank you very much. We suggest that you continue to watch our website for announcements on this. So Illinois took a no position in our view. Connecticut has, the legislature has passed a law authorizing the Department of Finance to regulate Bitcoin effectively as it sees fit. I have not read the law, but I've read the comments on it. I believe it was signed by the governor. I'm not really sure. This took place all in the last few months. But what they want to do is have people who are dealing in Bitcoin, they want to consider whether they are money transmitters or not. Transmitters is a fancy word. In the regulation of people who are not banks, you have money service providers. That's a FinCEN term, and it's used in the regulations that deal with this stuff. And people have to register it. If you want to cash a check, go to a cash checker, checking agency. He's a money service provider. You want to exchange your currency in Grand Central Station or something like that for some other kind of currency. He's a money exchanger. People can also be transmitters. You go to your local store. I'm sure there's one in Greenwich. I don't know where, but my office is in Stanford. P.S. I practiced in New York City for 35 years and decided I was mature enough no longer to do that. So the practice, though, is literally comes from all over the world, but it's mostly New York based. At any rate, there's a candy store down the street. I want to transmit money to wherever. Oh yes, we'll do it. We're an agent for, I can't think of the name of the company. Not American, huh? Yeah, Western Union. So they'll charge you a fee. When I got these brochures printed yesterday, she said, we talked about this, and I pointed out that one of the futures of Bitcoin is for money transmission, particularly outside the United States. She said, yeah, I had a guy come in here about a month ago to buy business cards. They were $80. He wire transferred the money to us. It cost him $35, and for our $80, we had to pay $35 for the receipt. That's crazy. And it was crazy for the guy to do it. I said, this guy's a businessman? She said, yeah. Okay, he won't be in business very long if he keeps doing things like that, that's for sure. Okay, you can transmit you can transmit value via Bitcoin from one location to another overseas at very, very little cost, 2-3% maybe, in 10 minutes. The problem is that the blockchain is irreversible. Once that transaction is registered, it's there. That's all. Well, it's a mistake. There's a mistake in the transaction. The recipient has the key number in his computer, or a key number, because he knows where in that key number tells him where in the blockchain, this immense blockchain, it's located. If he's willing to cooperate, he can do another transaction that says, take block A and minus it X dollars, and we're happy people. That's what is going to be, in my view, most of the use of blockchain technology in the Bitcoin world. Bank of America has filed a patent for blockchain technology, primarily for use of internally, I believe, to keep track of its funds floating all over the world. It's immutable, as I just said. Better not make a mistake when you enter it, because otherwise somebody's going to have to find out where it went in the system and find somebody else who has the key to change it. But once it's there, it's locked. Very interesting for auditors going into this thing, for those of you who are auditors at one time, CPAs, financial people, et cetera, et cetera. USAA, which in this audience I can actually mention and people will know about, the United Services Auto Association, has been working on a system also. And the use of it for finance has come to the attention of the superintendents of financing, and they have a committee that has published a set of model regulations, which is quite stiff. We'll see. New Hampshire, I am told, has a bill before its legislature to use blockchain technology for land titles, which is a terrific idea. If you've ever done a land title, you've got journals and you've got ledgers, and they work pretty well, and of course now they're online and what have you, but this becomes another step, and it will take a long time for people to be willing to trust it. And that doesn't mean that you won't have mistakes in it, but it will certainly, and you will still have to have deeds, mortgages, and what have you, because you're dealing with people. And that's how you get the thinking in our culture down. But it will certainly make it a lot easier to do a title search and do your land problems. Now, to get back to that's where the money is, there have been some newsworthy frauds and problems with this. Silk Road was, during its heyday, the largest drug dealing network in the United States. I saw one report, maybe 20%. And how did it work? One guy sat at his computer and he put together buyers and sellers. He didn't buy and sell, except he took a fee. And he is alleged to have made $110 million in 15 months or something like this, probably most in the last month, by doing this, and it became a network for drug dealers. He also was unhappy with an employee and tried to arrange his murder. But he was talking to FBI agents. You can argue about whether he really intended to do this or it was some kind of entrapment, but he got a life sentence when they caught him. But the interesting thing from our point of view is, how do they catch him? All of this is in his his laptop. The story is that he worked in a public library. He's sitting there at his table like this, and one day somebody shoved him off his computer. That was an FBI agent, because if they hadn't done that, and he'd gone like this, end of the program. He would have destroyed the program, and the evidence that they really wanted, they would have had to try to reconstruct it, et cetera, et cetera. That network, of course, is gone. But as soon as you hear about something like that, even if you're some kind of anarchist or something like that, nihilist, and you don't want government interference, the fact in our society is when those things happen, we want government to step in to make sure that things are being done honestly. Even with people who are presumably honest but sloppy, the computer world, as we all know, because it's not perfect, to say the least, you had the case of Mt. Gox. Mt. Gox was run by a young man out of Japan, not Japanese, he's a Westerner, Caucasian, and it became the largest wallet for this in the world. Meaning, we're not dealing with rocks, we're not dealing with diamonds, or tomatoes, or whatever they happen to be. How do you store this stuff? Well, you store it in a virtual or electronic wallet. Well, where is the wallet? Well, it's up in a cloud. But going back to the guys from Sao Paulo, they've got it in a server, and that's on the ground. The servers in this case happen to have been in Japan. Mt. Gox had somebody break into their system, not into the chain, not into the blockchain, into their system, but they got the key numbers, and they were able to grab a substantial number of bitcoins because they got the key numbers from the poorly protected system. Lawsuits broke out all over the world, and the Japanese government initially had taken the view, well, we don't know if it's really value or not. It's not money. It doesn't seem to fit into our statutes. They've taken a different view since that time, and there are a number of lawsuits going on in Japan against the guy who is running this thing. He's accused of having dipped into the well, so to speak, and taken some of the Bitcoin. So what is Bitcoin for legal purposes? There's a case in Texas. A guy advertised over the net for people to invest, and he was going to invest. The case doesn't involve what he was going to invest in. He happened to be investing in Bitcoin, he said. The lawyers argued to the court, there's no violation here. Bitcoin is an independent body that's peer-to-peer computers. The judge says, no, it's currency, because you can use Bitcoin to buy other things. So here's a decision saying it was Bitcoin. What were they buying? They thought they were buying into some kind of an investment company. So there's a securities law issue there. It turns out it was a Ponzi scheme, and the gentleman was tried in the Southern District of New York, Manhattan mostly, and was found guilty. But you have, therefore, two possibilities: currency, security. Now, security. How about options? How about swaps? Okay, the CFTC has come out with a decision recently when somebody was actually running options and swaps, saying it's a commodity. So it all depends on the context in which you're dealing with Bitcoin. And from a legal point of view, it is fascinating, because you get all of these concepts, and it's all at the leading edge of the law. And having been practicing law for 50 years, it's still fun for me to be there. So I suggest to you that you have a chance. You can, and the law is very fast developing. Connecticut has this thing that's going to develop into a regulation. New York has one. New York's law requires that people who get a bit license put on their advertisements licensed by the state of New York. That ought to become a badge of integrity, like a bank saying, member of the FDIC. There are a lot of people who don't want to register in New York. Very broad law and very expensive. $5,000 registration fee. Okay, that's not a big deal in the business world unless you're a really small guy working out of your apartment on your machine. But if you're going to do it in volume, that doesn't mean anything. But you have to put up a bond. You have to have a net capital. New York has said it will work with you. The regulation is full of the word reasonable. Some companies have decided they simply will not deal in New York, and others are proudly saying we are registered in New York because the law became effective August 8th. Let me see if I have something else in my notes to say to you. Let me end this part by saying that Bitcoin has many flaws. It's very exciting. I believe that in the long run, we will have some kind of worldwide digital currency, but it's going to be a long, long time because it has to be developed. The key to that is the fact that it is immutable, that it is a chain, that there are ways of changing the formulas that have been put in. It's limited to 21,600,000 Bitcoin divided into 100 million Satoshi per Bitcoin. Nobody deals in that with that yet. So you can say it's an open system and things like this. But you see, if you're dealing in it, you can see the flaws. ATMs are going to be set up worldwide for people to transmit money to their relatives back in India, Bangladesh, Philippines, wherever, and for people to use them for places like Argentina to transmit them the other way to the United States. People are going to deal in euros and these things. The thought was that when Greece was falling apart financially, oh boy, there's going to be a lot of Bitcoin used to get money out of Greece. Didn't happen. Why? Nobody knows about it. There's no volume of people who had access to Bitcoin or any way of getting it so that it had an effect. But one guy, according to the news clippings, wants to set up 3,000 Bitcoin ATMs in Greece. We'll see. And we'll also see what the Greek government, back to jurisdiction, has to say about that with euros disappearing from the economy. I'd be delighted if you had some questions.
Good morning. Can you tell us why the creator of the Bitcoin system,
Why he did it?
why he has chosen to remain, or he or she chosen to remain anonymous? Does he anticipate becoming some kind of
we
target?
don't know. We have to find him to ask him. I really mean it. Nobody knows who he is. They found a guy named Satoshi Nakamoto living in California. He's an engineer. He says, it's not me. He said, that's ridiculous. Look at the way I'm living. I'm living with my mother and I'm in my 50s. He said, if I had all that money, because he was the original inventor, I wouldn't be living like this. He said, leave me alone. Stop talking to me. Nobody really knows. It's an anonymous as the Bitcoin system itself, the blockchain.
Could you reach into your pocket and show me a Bitcoin?
No, I can't. All I can do is reach into my phone, dial up the company that I have a Bitcoin wallet at, get a code to them by putting in the normal kinds of security things and transmitting that Bitcoin someplace else, or giving that key number to somebody to transmit it into my wallet, and it's a one-way street. It's very secure, that part of it. The problem isn't the Bitcoin, the blockchain being insecure, it's the people who are dealing with it.
A currency like US dollar and Swiss franc are backed up by future revenues of the country which is issuing them and by assets that the country owns. Silver and gold had a value also for their intrinsic industrial value. What is backing up the Bitcoin?
Very good question. What's the value of Bitcoin? Silver and gold have value. I suggest to you that gold, until the last 50, 60 years, really had no value. It had almost no industrial use, except it could be used for jewelry. But we trusted in it. And that is exactly what the story is with Bitcoin. It's also part of the reason it's so volatile in price, because you have a relatively small number of people dealing in it, and you have no one who is stabilizing that market, as the currency markets are frequently stabilized by governments interfering with the normal flow of money in those markets. And of course people say, oh, the government's involved, that's terrible. And other people say, yeah, it's terrible if you're on the wrong side of what you do. If you're on the right side, you're happy. There is no intrinsic value. That's all there is to it. It's all trust. And that's exactly what Nakamoto was saying when he made his statement. I'll read a portion of it again. What is needed is an electronic payment system based on cryptographic proof instead of a trust, and then allowing any two people to make an exchange. Because that's what it is. What's the value of the rocks that people were exchanging at one time? Well, the diamonds. Diamonds are an artificially priced commodity. It's held up, fortunately, because most of us have some diamonds in our family, etc.
Just a follow-up to that question, the volatility has been quite high over the recent months, I think doubling and halving. What will cause that to stabilize so that we have some idea of the relationship between that and the dollar or the euro?
Bitcoin started out around 2009, $1, $10, and in 2013, 14, it went up to $1,000, $1,200. It's dropped down to now where it is stable, i.e. in the range of $225 to $300. That's hardly stable, because look at the percentage of change that takes place with it all the time. It is uncontrolled. It is something that people, as I said, arbitrage in. Arbitrage economically is a means of stabilizing a country, because if you have enough people buying and selling it, the price will remain stable. Same thing's true in the stock market, except in the Bitcoin market, there are no statistics regarding the company. There's no disclosures to speak of. It's just there, and different people in different areas and different exchanges, transmitters, are transmitting it and dealing in this area. They're registered with FinCEN if they're in this country, or if they're dealing in this country, they have to be registered with FinCEN. In other words, if a company happens to be in Czechoslovakia and it is buying and selling to people in the United States, it is, in our view, subject to registration with FinCEN if it's in any kind of business relationship, i.e. the individual who's doing it once in a while, nobody cares about them because they're not billionaires or something like that where they can really affect the market. This is all the kind of language that you hear in regard to the stock market or the Forex market. And it's going to take off from that. Nobody does these things from scratch.
It's still very unclear to me how this works in practice. If I wanted to use Bitcoins, do I have to register with some state, national, or international organization and get a PIN? Are all Bitcoins around the world valued against the dollar, or are there such things as exchange rates between countries and their Bitcoins?
No, they are all, it's a single world market. The blockchain is the blockchain. And the question is, can you buy or sell a link in that chain? And it makes no difference where you're dealing. And by the way, there's no way of, as in the example I gave of the young man who came in, there's no way of knowing where the people you're dealing with are. You're dealing with email addresses, a Gmail address, or something like that, or a Y-mail address, or an address that instead of ending with COM now ends at ME. The new ends that you can put on emails and the like.
Thank you for your remarks. The codes for the Bitcoin, I understand it's a solution to a polynomial. And who blesses those solutions? Because
Who what?
who blesses the solutions? That is, Bitcoin, as I understand it, it's not a set number of Bitcoin. The equations can be solved, and if they are properly solved, you can create a Bitcoin.
But there are a limit. It's 21,600,000 Bitcoins. That's it. No one controls it.
That's right, but if I come up with a solution, like the 21 billion, I come up with a solution, that solution then would then allow me to get a Bitcoin.
That's correct. You would be a miner. That's
Right.
what it's called.
Yes, so if you come up with a solution, I saw an example of a firm in Iceland
Right.
who went up there because electricity, of course, is very low value.
It's cheap, and the air conditioning is cheap because you
And-
just open the windows.
Right, and they were running computer programs to try to solve the equations. And they were coming up with solutions of this 21 billion
Right,
to say, we got a solution, we got a Bitcoin.
right.
So who verifies that that is indeed a solution?
The technical answer, I don't know. I will tell you that the controversy in the Bitcoin community has been that you cannot enter your Bitcoins into the blockchain until you have an adequate size block. And the question is, what's the adequate size block? And the little guys say, oh, it's got to be a small one. The big guys say it's going to be a big one. I don't know the answer to your question beyond the fact that you've got a limit. There is a report that there are 17 million Bitcoin have been mined so far, and the formula is set up in such a way so it's a progressive thing. The higher you get on the chain, the harder it becomes to do the mining, much like gold. The easy gold's been found. But the chain itself, this is not a good answer at all, itself is the one that decides whether or not you can get your particular mining results into it, whether it passes the assay, so to speak.
You mentioned that originally, coming out of the barter system, rocks and then bits of copper were used as a store of value. And I think most of us think if we have $1 in our pocket, it'll buy the same thing tomorrow as today. But you mentioned that Bitcoin values fluctuate considerably. So how can Bitcoins become popular if they are not a store of value?
I agree with you. That's one of its major problems, and that's why I say it has to evolve. The blockchain technology has to evolve substantially before it will be accepted in lieu of fiat currencies being now issued by governments. One time, you had coins, things like this, and they were all over the Roman Empire simply because they were accepted. Well, we're nowhere near this for Bitcoin yet. It's just too volatile. It's interesting. The legal questions are fascinating, but we're a long way, in my view, from it becoming a replacement for fiat currencies.
Didn't a few years ago Bitcoins go belly up or something? Didn't the whole thing fall apart at one time?
Well, what happened...
About 3 years ago or so?
As I said, what happened is it went up to $1,200 or $1,000 or $1,200 per coin, and then it plummeted back down to somewhere around 200 or less. And that's correct. Why did that happen? Well, Silk Road didn't help. Mt. Gox didn't help. None of these things help. All of this is based, as this gentleman had asked over here, on trust. If you see Silk Road come along and the government stops it, as they properly should, or a Mt. Gox come along, you're going to lose faith and you're not going to buy it, and you're not going to trust it. People do use it to trade in goods, but I suggest to you that the reason that they do it is that if you're a merchant and you take Bitcoin in payment, and we've had one or two people come and want to pay us in Bitcoin, we don't keep it in Bitcoin any more than I would keep it in stock of a company if they gave it to me, unless I had some kind of inside track for the company, knew about it or what have you, et cetera, et cetera. As an aside, I was the first general counsel to Gartner, Inc., which now does $1.6 billion. Nobody who was in that company at the beginning has been in it for 20 years, okay, including Gideon Gartner. There came a time, as one does in the venture world, we exited individually or whatever. That's the same kind of thing with currencies, Forex, or anything else. It's trust, and when there's no trust, people are out of it. They'll take the dollar bills or the $100 bills that are being manufactured, i.e. printed by the Treasury, and stick it into their lumpy mattresses, in my view. Eventually, that might be Bitcoin, but not for a long time.
It seems to me like governments looking at this would see, one, the potential for money laundering, two, the potential for evading SWIFT, like Iran could trade without going through the controls, and thirdly, the net aggregate monetary supply can be increased outside of the control of any government, which means that the governments could lose control of their economies, essentially. Why on earth would any government want to approve this?
Okay, good question, and a very basic question. A lot of the people who are in the Bitcoin space world don't want government involved. Of course, you're right that it can be used for money laundering and the like. And of course, in my view, the reason government gets involved is to stop that. That's why people have to register if they're in this business. There are exceptions that we don't, users, investors, whatever that means. People who are putting Bitcoin in their market, in their mattress, people who are selling normal commodities and taking Bitcoin in payment. Overstock.com was one of the first that said they would take Bitcoin in payment. But if you're going to be registered, one of the major things that you have to do is follow the anti-money laundering rules and the know your customer rules. We have a fellow who's setting up ATMs. To use the ATM, they don't just put in their license into the machine or something like that. They hold up the license so that the picture on the license is the same as the guy who's holding it. That's his way of making sure that he's really getting the identification of the person. If you look at the back of your Connecticut driver's license, it's got a QR code on it. I don't know if anybody ever used it for anything, but I noticed it the other day. New York licenses don't have that. So all of this technology is evolving very quickly. But that's a major problem. Will governments allow this? They can't stop it. They have to control it. That's the best you can do. And stop using and get people to not use it for money laundering. Major problem.
Could you clarify again the relationship between digital currency transfer and blockchain?
Is there a relationship between digital currency and the blockchain? Is that it? Transfer. The answer is yes, because the blockchain is where the digital currency is. It has its value because it has a reference in that blockchain, which is on every computer that happens to have the codes to get into it. And the value, of course, is the fact that people are willing to recognize that currency, as we've been discussing at length.
Is it possible that in the future, the banking systems in the world will be motivated to be more efficient and more economical for transferring money as a result of the catalytic effect, if you will, of Bitcoins? In other words,
very-
what will happen in the future to traditional banking?
That's exactly why a company like Bank of America has patented a digital currency system, because they think it will. When you go to these money transmitter conventions like this 2020 convention, that's the cost. That's what they're talking about. That the fact that transmitting money around the world, the example of this guy who bought business cards was really crazy, is very high. Not that it's illegitimate. I transferred $2,000 for a client to HSBC in Hong Kong. Cost $40. That's nuts. I could have transferred $40,000 for the same $40 on this side of the transaction. But it's very high. A lot of it is caused not only by the fact that it goes through multiple banks, but also by the fact that you need to have all of these controls. It works as a two-way street, which could be avoided with the money laundering. There are cases in New York, the federal district court located in, which happens to be in Brooklyn, that were brought by American residents, citizens, and I assume some non-citizens, who were hurt by Hezbollah terrorist attacks when they were in Israel. They could have been ordinary tourists. I don't know. Those cases were brought under the Foreign Tort Claims Act. The question of jurisdiction came up. Jurisdiction was based on the fact that Canadian Arab Bank, not located in New York, had transmitted money to the Hezbollah bad guys through a correspondent bank in New York. That transaction took 2 seconds, if that long. That was enough for the courts to hold jurisdiction. And the New York Court of Appeals has confirmed the jurisdiction. That's the way the world goes round.
To me, currency is only good for what it can buy. So if I have a wallet of Bitcoins, how do I exchange that for an ice cream cone or a bar of gold?
Well, first of all, I'll assume that you don't have the wallet in your own computer, or the key number in your own, literally in your own wallet, which some people do because they want to keep it off the system. You get, as I recall,
Like this.
you have somebody who you want to transmit the Bitcoin to or get the Bitcoin to. You get a number from the transferee, which you use to transfer that Bitcoin to the location he wants or to put it into currency. If you use some of the larger people, larger outfits, that's how it works. They maintain the wallets. People want to keep it in their own computer. Better not. That computer better not crash, because that's it. It's like, poof, you've burned it.
Question for you. I have a dollar bill in my pocket, and that can be used to pay debts by law. Where is the right to use Bitcoins to pay for debts? If somebody offers to pay me in Bitcoin, I don't have to accept it, do I?
No, it's not
But
legal.
I do have to accept payment in dollars.
Okay, legal, Bitcoin is not legal tender anywhere in the world. Legal tender means that you have to accept it. Interesting question. Recent announcement. Somebody in Russia wants to set up a bit ruble. One of the major agencies, probably the major prosecutors, said illegal. We can only have one tender in this legal tender in this country, and that's the ruble. Banking authorities said, well, not so fast. And then it went to the Duma, which has had a bill before it to regulate Bitcoin and other digital currencies, and it's become a controversy there. Now, normally we think that in Russia, what Putin says goes, but this isn't important enough for that. And Putin recently was asked, well, what about Bitcoin? He said, well, it might be of some value to some people. In other words, Putin shrugged, which gets us back to Atlas shrugged.
I want to thank you for sharing your insights with us. Thank you. We also have a certificate of appreciation for speaking to us. Yeah, it's not a Bitcoin. And again, thank you for sharing your insights with us.